Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third of three webinars held as part of the Public Sector Transformation or PST Convention 2022. My name is Iyang, and I will be your MC for today. The PST Convention, held as part of the annual Public Service Week, is a platform for public officers to pick up best practices from the public, private, and people sectors to spur transformation in our own areas of work. It is also an opportunity to align officers to the three whole-of-government priorities to build our future, namely, future of work, future workforce, and future workplace. This year, the PST Convention webinars are organized by the National Parks Board. This afternoon, here at the Singapore Botanic Gardens, amidst a backdrop of beautiful orchids, we have invited a panel of distinguished speakers to share with us their experiences on the future workplace. The first half of the webinar will begin with panel discussions by the speakers, followed by a Q&A session where you may submit your questions to the panel. Today, we'll be using Pigeonhole for our Q&A session. You may click on the link in the Zoom chat to access the Pigeonhole and enter the event passcode PSTC 2022. Alternatively, you can scan the QR code that will be shown on the screen from time to time. We would also like to invite you to vote for your favorite terrarium in our same Pigeonhole link. Voting will close at the end of today's webinar, where we will be announcing the winners of our team challenges. I will now hand the time over to Mr. Jordan Tan, Director Digital Workplace from GovTech, who will be moderating today's webinar. Jordan, please.
Hi, thank you, Iyang. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jordan Tan, Director Digital Workplace from GovTech. Welcome again to the Future Workplace webinar. I'm really looking forward to this panel dialogue and your questions. So Iyang mentioned that this is the third and the last webinar series for the Public Service Week. And we are really saving the best for the last. Well, joke aside, future of work, future workplace, and future workforce are three key strategic thrusts for the public sector transformation. So before we start, I would like to give a big shout out to the MPark and the organizing team for putting this together and having us here for this exciting topic. And here we are in Botanic Garden, and we have this backdrop of the greenery behind us. And I must say that this is really signifies the amazing work that MPark has done for us and for Singapore, and making Singapore a city in nature. Being a nature lover, I would love to have this greenery as part of my future workplace. Now, the topic today is about striving in the hybrid workplace and how this shapes the way we communicate, we work, and we engage. The panelists here will be talking about and sharing how good communication and engagement at workplace can be, and also we'll cover how we can strengthen team cohesion in a hybrid workplace, and as well as the government perspective on the flexible work arrangement. So with this, I would like to introduce the three distinguished panelists. On my far right is Professor David Chan. He's a professor of psychology and director of behavioral science initiative at Singapore Management University. His published scientific works have been cited over 13,000 times in various disciplines. Early this year, he was the first Asian and Singaporean to receive the prestigious award from a leading professional association of psychologists, Society of Industrial and Organization Psychology. Next to David is Jason Chen. He's the Deputy Director, Workplace, Ministry of Manpower. He oversees the workplace policy, migrant worker management and well-being, labor relations, workplace safety, and corporate functions. On my immediate right is Emily Yao. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Allen & Overy in Singapore. She leads the corporate functions in Singapore and is concurrently the co-head of human resources for Asia Pacific. Allen & Overy is one of the largest international law firms in the world. Now, let's do a quick poll. If you look at the poll questions, and there's a QR code, please scan that. And the first question here is, what do you think personally is the optimal number of days in a week to work in office? So this is not only about COVID-19, but also how best you can balance commitment at home. So as you answer the poll questions, I'll encourage you to also think of the questions that you have for the panelists and enter it in there. So for those questions that you see that other has entered and is resonant with you, please press the upvote button and we'll look at the upvotes count and manage it and prioritize your questions accordingly. I also encourage you to put in the name of the panelists in the questions you're asking so that we can better direct the questions accordingly. So with this, I'm going to get into the panel dialogue. We're going to talk about that in the three levels. First, externally from the industry and organization, then we'll dive into the employees before getting into what are the progressive measures that organization can adopt to support a future workplace. So with that, we'd like to ask, what is the workplace trend against the industry that you have observed? Now, on one end of the spectrum, you have Airbnb who says that employees can work remotely forever. At the other end of the spectrum, you have Goldman Sachs who are asking for 5 days a week in office. So what are your views? So Professor David would like to share your view.
Sure. Thanks, Jordan, and good to be here with everybody, and also be my esteemed panelists, Jason and Emily. Well, I guess the question for me was, or for us, was future trends in the future workplace. Now, if you ask anybody now, I guess any well-informed leader, academic practitioner, including the public service or your leaders, and in fact, just the ordinary officer on the ground, if 1 or 2 years ago you asked them, the questions would be more or less the same. If you go down the list, it would be about digital society, it would be about big data, about the importance of sustainability and so on. So all these will still remain important, but as given the cue from your introduction, I think, Jordan, is the idea of work from home has come to the fore. Right, as part of your digital society, digitization, telecommuting, and telework, and so on, as a result of COVID. So I think what COVID has done is, while the other trends are important, for the officer or for the employee or for even the organizations and policymakers, what was a little bit unexpected relative to pre-COVID was the sudden coming to the fore about working from home. Well, to be clear, when we talk about the trends, I think work from home is just one aspect of a larger thing called remote working. Right, so WFH have been a little bit overused, I would say. I like to use WOTO, WOTO, right, which is it's all about working outside traditional offices. And so that gives you the notion about remote working, and also about flexi work. By flexi work, at least for researchers, I tend to look at it in terms of what I call the STS. We tend to look at it from a spatial, then a temporal, and also a scope issue. Right, by spatial, you will be, of course, flexi place. You don't have to be really in your physical office, right? By temporal, it'll be a flexi hours, including what time you come to work, how many days or how many hours you actually work, and so on. And then the last one on scope is a little bit not discussed so much, is about flexi tasks, right? In terms of not just your workload, but the kind of work you do and so on. So I thought it's quite important, as I'm sure the audience listening in, WFH is right, in your mind. But let's look at it, as part of a flexi work and so on. And I'll just end by saying that to your question on general trends, right? I want to make 2 points, I guess. I think the first point is to be quite clear what COVID has done, because COVID is global and we are more or less, regardless of cases, we are in an endemic kind of phase of living with COVID or navigating post-pandemic realities. What happened was that pre-COVID, for 30 years, including people like myself, we have been doing research on telework, telecommuting, flexi work, and so on. The research is pretty clear. When done properly, flexi work or remote working has lots of advantages in terms of impact on both organizational, team, and individual level, on your productivity and well-being, and so on, if it is properly implemented, right? So that qualification is very important, because if you don't implement it properly, flexi work sometimes can have lots of unintended negative consequences. And that research was pre-COVID for a long time in Asia, Europe, and so on. And Asia wasn't catching up, right? In Asia, if you look at our organizations, very often policies were not really done with research on telework in mind. But COVID changed that. So what happened was during COVID, everybody, because of BCP or business continuity plans, you have to start working from home. And then people begin to see the need for it. You have to do it. And then researchers, of course, quickly come in and say, well, let's do some research and so on. So an interesting trend between the connectivity of industry and research is that Asia is no longer behind because you are a little bit like no choice, but you got to do it kind. What that means is that all of us will be suddenly bombarded with surveys. Leaders will be expected to make informed decisions. You will be every day, listening to social media and the mainstream media about this survey found this, that survey found that. And that's not easy because there are good surveys, bad surveys, good studies, bad studies. And that is actually a trend that we need to be prepared because everybody will come to you with one survey finding and say, this is good or this is bad and so on. But to round off, I would say the real impact for all officers who are listening in now is about expectations. I think what it does, what COVID did was that because you have to do it, then you found that it can be done, you are able to do it. Some of you are willing to do it. And then some of you, many of you probably want to do it. And that created a whole range of expectations that never existed before. So employees, employers, leaders now have to deal with these expectations. So I think that is the key thing if you ask me about trend. And I would just round off by saying that be a little bit careful when we talk about number of days and all. There are lots of differences across countries, across contexts. And the question about working from home specifically has already moved from is it good, is it bad, should we do it, should we not? This is a general prescriptive question to much more solution-based, much more issue-focused questions about, now we got to do it, we should do it, but how do we do it well in order to maximize the positives and prevent the negatives? And I hope that today's session, will give us some clues or some food for thought on these issues. Right? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor David, about different perspective, right? It's not all about work from home, but it's also about work outside office, and all around the implementation is just as important around those solution-based. Maybe from Emily, your perspective, right? Coming from a global law firm, and we also spoke about, Asian versus Western and how we are catching up. Can you share your view, please?
Thanks, Jordan, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this convention. Actually, picking up on what Prof. David said, how COVID has actually accelerated a lot, or accelerated how much employers and employees have embraced all these flexible options. In many of the private sector firms, global law firms, or professional services firms, we have these HR policies that allow for not just flexible. Well, it comes under the umbrella of flexible working, but flexible working means you can work from home, you can have staggered hours, you can work part-time, or you can job share. So there's a whole host of things that come under what we would call flexible working. What we found, though, is that whilst we've always had these policies in place, not very many people have actually subscribed to them. They haven't made use of them, but depending on the country. So maybe because commutes are longer in places like London and New York, more people were keen to take up a flexible working or staggered hours approach to work. In Singapore, though, we've noticed that actually not very many people have taken up the option, even though they have the ability to do so. I think what COVID-19 has helped do is to accelerate the adoption of those, the implementation and adoption of those policies. So now, a far greater number of employees are actually opting to work, remotely, work staggered hours, depending on their childcare arrangements. And I think it's just that mindset shift, right? The attitude of both the bosses who have started to trust their employees to actually do their work, even though they can't actually physically see them, and the employees also to actually take up what has actually been on offer all this time. COVID-19. I mean, this has just been a rare advantage and a bright spark in this 2-year pandemic.
Yeah, well said about this COVID-19 having the the way that accelerate not only the digital transformation aspect of it, but also the mindset shift, right, which is really critical here. So Jason, over to you. What's your perspective, especially coming from the government?
Okay, so from MAM's perspective, I think what is clear is that flexible work arrangements, or FWA, is clearly here to stay. Employers clearly recognize the value of FWAs. They know that they have to offer it to be able to attract and retain talent, because it's largely a very tight labor market, and they know that if they don't offer it, employees have lots of other options. And it also bears out in the surveys. So recently there was a Business Time article saying that 5 in 10 Singapore workers would consider quitting their jobs if they were made to return full-time to their workplaces. And employees today, they place work-life harmony together with pay as the number one thing that they look for in jobs, ahead of things like job security and career progression. So employees value it, employers know it, they have responded. So the proportion of companies that offer some form of FWAs today has risen from about 50% in 2018 to 80% in 2020. So employers are also responding. On government side, we do hope to lock in this COVID gain, seize the momentum, and entrench flexible work arrangements as part of the future workplace in Singapore. So we do have plans to issue tripartite guidelines that would ask all companies to have the right processes and procedures in place to consider requests for FWAs, consider such requests fairly reasonably, and then communicate the decisions back to the employees in a transparent way. It will not mandate how much of FWAs should be adopted, but it mandates the process to consider, to offer, and to consider FWAs. So FWAs, flexible arrangements, is here to stay. That's quite clear. But what is not so clear is how much of it will stay. And I think this is still a big question mark. How much of work from home is the right optimal level? I think the industry is also still trying to feel its way around. I mean, one reason why there's so many surveys, endless surveys and findings, is because it's still a big question mark. People are still proffering, oh, this is the best way, and other industries, it is the best way. The jury is still out. I think during the pandemic, people just, businesses just tahan, 50% work from home, whatever there's business cost. But during the pandemic, they had to comply. But if you ask them to do it in a sustained way for the long term, to find the right, to do it properly, I think the industry is still trying to find out what is the best arrangement for itself. I think both based on the surveys that I've seen, people are gravitating towards 2 out of 5 working days. I just spoke to Emily, a law firm also has something similar. My friends out there in private sector, I think the magic number is around 2 out of 5 days work from home. But I think it's really, there's no one size fits all. And I think it's just so much down to personal preferences. Just having a chat with David and Emily before this, and we were just saying, I was sharing how, in M1 with our tripartite partners with NTUC and SNAF, the employer side, we have regular tripartite negotiations, and online it's just very hard to negotiate while being able to read the person's body language and coming together to collaborate, to arrive at a win-win-win position. It's very hard. And then you thought, okay, so everybody should just all show up and let's all negotiate in person. Then some people are like, Jason, actually you didn't have to call me down just for this. I could, then save me a trip to your office. So I think it's really, there's no one size fits all. I think individual organizations, individual divisions, individual units would have to find the best way for that makes sense for itself.
Thank you, Jason, for the perspective. What is clear in the trend, right, is the flexible work arrangement. The percentage of which, at least in Singapore, is increasing, right, from 50% to 80%. That's quite significant. And going forward, there's just no one size that fits all, depending on the profile of the employee, their job, and so on and so forth. So with that, can we bring up the poll results from the last one? And here we are. And we can see that the employee expectation from the public officers, we can see a 2.55, 2.5 days. That's like half of the time in a week to be back. And we see a peak, probably more around the 2, right? 45%. At the extreme end, probably not the 2.2%. We see that 5 days in a week have a very, very small number. So that's an interesting perspective. Obviously, this is from a public officer's perspective. May I ask Emily from, again, private sector, what is your view, right, about what are the employee expectations of the future workplace in your organization, looking at what we have, and how employees in your organization are responding to the workplace changes?
So in the private sector, especially in a professional services firm, I think in a lot of instances, we are guided by what our clients actually need from us, because it doesn't, we can't be out of sync with our clients, because if our clients are requiring us to come in, or if our clients are saying, I want to have a physical meeting because I want to sit across the table, I want to look you in the eye, and I want to negotiate with you in person, then unfortunately, as a service provider, you respond to that. You can't have the client sat in the meeting room and you're zooming in, on virtually in that sense. So what we have explained to our employees is, yes, there is. We will try to provide for flexibility. There is scope for flexibility, but ultimately, it can't be at the expense of our service to the clients whom we support. So the employees, I think, especially post-pandemic, have an expectation that there will be even greater flexibility or greater allowance of the flexibility that the firm is already, that the industry already provides for. But again, it's not across the board, because a lot depends on what your own home. If we're just looking at work from home, right? A lot of it depends on what the individual's home situation is. If you live in a 3-room flat without a proper home office, then with only one real space for you to set up your laptop, that's not that's not a practical place for you to carry out significant amounts of work, especially if you've got other family members who may be jostling for that same space, versus someone who lives in a large house, who has a dedicated home office. So a lot of it depends on the individual's background. It depends on the role that the individual plays as well. There are some roles which just can't be performed remotely. For instance, your front of house people, your business services team, your mailroom clerks, your PAs to an extent, depending on whether or not the lawyers that they support, if the bosses they support tend to come in on a regular basis and need on the ground, in-person support, then that particular individual also needs to adapt his or her expectations of what his or her flexibility and how he or she performs her role. So I think it's not there's no one policy or one practice that can be applied across the board. It just depends on the individual stakeholders, the individual's specific situations, and most importantly, the role that you perform.
Okay. Thanks, Emily, for that perspective from the private sector. Essentially, again, back to the key point about different roles and even different background that employees have, and therefore different expectations. Now, for Jason, this is obviously the poll from our public officers. Does it kind of surprise you? And what is your thoughts about the employee expectation?
Okay, no, I think it was in the right ballpark. I was quite intrigued that there are 2.2% of you who think that you can work from home 5 days a week. But let's set that aside. I don't think there is a right level of work from home for the civil service. I don't think it's possible to prescribe that. And I think, as David said, there are just so many different forms of FWA, right? There is flexi time, flexi work, flexi place. You've got staggered hours, you've got compressed work week, part-time arrangements. It's really quite a wide array of FWAs, and officers each have their own expectations of what kind of FWAs they need and how much. So not very meaningful to get into individual expectations, but I would say as a whole, expectations from officers that they want greater flexibility. I think that's quite a given, and I think we see it today. Looking back at the days when I was an officer, you really feel a bit paiseh, a bit sheepish when you switch off your computer 6 o'clock. You try not to make too much noise. You're not going to say, "Hey, bye everyone, I'm gonna head home now," because everybody's going to give you a funny look like, wow, can go home already. So that was before. But yeah, I think today after COVID, people head off. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. You see them for half a day. They head off to work, then they head home to work. They want to beat the traffic. Nobody really bats an eyelid when people leave early these days, because they know the work will continue to be done even after the officer goes home. So I think that expectations have clearly shifted. I think public officers do expect to be trusted, that they will not abuse such privileges. I think supervisors have placed greater trust on the officers. And I think that in large part is also because technology today is just so different from what it was even as recent as 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, when there really wasn't WhatsApp. There wasn't, WhatsApp, you can set up a group call. There wasn't all these Skype. And yeah, previously when you had one of your fellow teammates working from home, it's very hard to catch that person to, brainstorm together, clarify things, scribble over whiteboards. But today, technology enables that to take place. So I think that would only continue to grow. And I do think that flexible work arrangements can be sustained in a public service.
So regardless of the number of days in office, right, the expectations of the employees is greater flexibility. I choose what really meet my needs, and I have the flexibility to choose to maximize my performance. And like the fact about closing a laptop, probably these days is like what you mentioned about technology with Skype or SG Teams, right? Your status will be like green, and maybe when you shut it off, you're like, should I like turn it on later again? That's probably one of the things that people may be looking around. So thanks for that. And maybe building on to that, right? What opportunity and risks should employees look out for in a future workplace? Professor David, maybe you can share with us what is your perspective on that?
Opportunities and risks. Talk about risks and opportunities. It's always good to talk about negatives and then positives. But before that, I just want to reiterate, of course, and reinforce what both Emily and Jason said. I thought there are two things that is worth reiterating, but I won't repeat it. And that depends on the role. Role will involve nature of the task, nature of the work. And if I may add, I will also depend on resources. If we were to just blindly follow a norm, or if you implement a policy even within civil service and you find that some of our agencies or units are not ready, but because a policy is given by, say, MOM or PSD, and then you have to do it, but you really don't know how to do it, but you have to follow the policy, that could have a lot of unintended negative consequences. So it is quite important prior to dishing out all these guidelines to ensure that we understand, what is the context. I've worked 30 over years with, many of you listening in, so I know how it works within the public service. Very important to ensure the implementation, which is key. Now, you may have a good idea, but if your implementation is not ready, then it becomes a good idea barely implemented. It's actually worse than average idea well implemented. The second point is also role, yes, but resources, the realities of it, the context of it, the conditions for it become important. The other point that I agree, of course, with Jason, where he emphasized the no one size fits all. So regardless of your poll, regardless of even a guideline of 2 days or 3 or 1.5 or whatever, it is very important to make clear that the supervisors, employees, directors, even perm secs, that it is sometimes quite okay to have less than 2 or more than 2. So the kind of a range is important. Even in your poll, anybody with statistics will know that there was a wide distribution. So the mean is not meaningful when you have a wide distribution. So bear that in mind. And that goes back to reinforcing Jason's point that just be careful when we give you a policy, we meaning them. It doesn't mean that it is a hard and fast rule. I would just say that risks and opportunities. I would just say that please bear in mind that number of days, the reality is that the norms of the industry matter, how you implement it matter. So those are realities. But to me, it's an operational question. It's a second order question. The more fundamental important question is, do we know how to implement work from home adequately so that you do the positives and you don't have the negatives? And then that goes back to your expectations and your question, Jordan, on risks and opportunities, right? Psychologists will all tell you, you don't need psychologists to actually tell you that unmet expectations is one of the worst things that can happen in an organization. So it is one thing to find out expectations, try to meet them. It is actually more important to have realistic, aspirational, good expectations that fit the reality and fit the future. For both sides. So the bosses need to know what is going to happen and be realistic to the needs. It's like your national conversation. Be a little bit careful about what are the needs. You have to look at the sentiments, but you don't just pander to sentiments, right? Our civil service is the last to do that, and the same for your officers. You need to look at what works, what is the best for the organization, both in productivity and well-being. And I think if you sit down and reflect, you will realize that 5 days is not better than 4 days to be at home. 4 days is not better than 3. 3 is not better than 2. That doesn't mean that 2 days is going to be worse than 3 days and so on, right? It really depends on the particular situation. So directly to your question, then what are the risks? The risks will be obvious, unrealistic expectations. The other risk, of course, is that if as a boss, as a civil service, if you don't start, like what I think Jason is implying, don't understand the trends and say, oh, all of you just come back to work, well, you are short of talent. People will leave you, People might not leave you now, but when the economy gets better, then people will leave you. So it really depends. It's also a talent issue that you have to be quite prepared for it. So those are the realities. And I'll end off with opportunities, right? It's not so bleak, don't worry, right? It's not like everything is negative. Research is very clear, right? When well implemented, you actually increase in your productivity, you increase in your creativity. The very simple fact that most of your officers don't have a window view. You work in cubicles, many of you, right? And you'll be surprised, like what NParks will know, what greenery can do for you, right? At home, you can have a window view. In a while, you can walk away for 5 minutes, and research shows that itself only makes a lot of a difference. So the opportunities are tremendous on well-being, and we all know how important mental health is and so on. So balance that, and the way to go is not to be too fixated on the number of days. There will be guidelines. Please allow people to have the sense and sensibility to implement it in a way that benefits both the organization and the employee. Within the last point I want to make very important is like equity, right? So be very careful, so take SMU for example. It's quite a big university. There are schools and there are units. Now, if one dean of a school chooses to say you can stay at home for 4 days, all the admin stuff, it put pressures on the other 6 or 7 deans to say that, well, you can only stay at home in 2 days. People get angry with this dean because the guy just says 6 days and, well, there's no 6 days. Say 4 days and then you say 2 days. So please be careful, my dear civil servants, supervisors. When you implement, have a bit of a civic virtue, we call it citizenship behavior. Don't just think about what works for your organization, think about the impact of your decision on the other units around you. I think that is a very important thing, which of course our PSL, your public service leaders, will have to bear in mind as well. It's a point that I seldom talk about. As a director, I care about my unit, but remember, whatever you do is a civic virtue, citizenship behavior is how does it impact on other units that actually don't go into your direct KPI.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing the risk, right, and the opportunity. And definitely, that will segue to the question, the larger question, what progressive measures organization can take, right, to minimize the risk and then, increase the opportunity, like increase productivity and so on and so forth. Before we get into the next questions, let's bring up the word cloud. If I were to ask again the audience to scan the QR code and then enter, type in one word to describe an attribute of the future workplace that matters most to you. You can type in that. Okay, we already have some words there. And while doing that, maybe I'll ask Emily, what would be one word for you to describe the future workplace?
Doesn't look like it's there, but my word would probably be collaboration, because again, the workplace is actually anywhere that you have a mobile device and an internet connection, so you can actually work wherever. I think here I'm defining the workplace as the office, the physical space where people come together. So for me, that word will be collaboration.
Collaborations. And Professor David?
More than one word, as like all professors. But if you force me to do one word, I'll go back to all the research I've been doing for 30 years, and that's adaptability. The adaptability is used very generically. You need to adapt to the circumstances, so long as it's within your consistent values, there are lots of things to adapt. By the way, if you change things in the unprincipled way, it's called hypocrisy. If you change things in the principled way, it's called adaptability.
And Jason, what would be your one word?
No, I like flexibility. I think that would be my one word.
All right, cool. Yeah, okay. So yeah, for me, it's definitely more flexibility for me as well, given that various opportunity and we can potentially leverage on. So the question that I would like to pose to the panelists is around how workplace is changing in your organizations and what kind of progressive measures your organization have taken to address these changes, and maybe across three levels, right? The employees, the team, and organizations. Maybe for that, Jason?
Okay. I thought I wouldn't share what MUM is doing because MUM is just one organization and we have our own unique considerations, different job requirements. Rather, maybe I'll share what I gathered from PSD, very helpfully helped to compile some good practices and what whole of government agencies are doing. I thought more interesting to share that. So I think if you look across agencies, work from home, I think that guidance on work from home is very common. Very common for agencies, divisions to kind of designate a certain day of the week where everybody will kind of come back for team meetings, for collaborative projects. I think that's general approach. I think quite a number of agencies have also taken to redesign their workplaces, facilitate more hot desking, facilitate provisioning of more collaborative spaces. So that's again quite common. I picked up on a couple of more interesting practices that I thought I'll share with the audience today. I like what GovTech did. We talk about flexi time, flexi place, flexi load. GovTech has what they call Flexi Fit. So GovTech officers, any time of the day you want to go to the gym to sweat it out, it's okay, Flexi Fit, as long as you make up the hours later on in the day. I thought that was pretty cool. In some agencies, MUM included, AGO, EDB, they basically block out a few weeks of certain parts of the year, June holidays, December holidays, where they try not to have too many, they try not to have internal meetings, internal events, so that officers find it a bit easier to take leave. I read how EDB try not to have internal meetings on Fridays, so that more of the officers can take Friday off to work from home. Then they get I won't say long weekend, but it kind of feels more shiok lah, right? That they get to work from home on Fridays as well. Public service, let me do a little plug for PSD. They are going to launch what they call co-work at Gov workspaces across the island, where it's open to all public officers. Basically, it's for officers who maybe maybe their home's not very conducive for work. They've got kids. They need somewhere to work quietly. They're in between meetings. They can go to any of these co-working spaces to do their work. PSD, I believe by third quarter of this year, will launch 10 of these spaces, and then by end of this year, they'll progressively add more locations. So look out for it.
Right. Lots of exciting stuff that we are rolling out in the government. So Emily, maybe you can share what are the measures your organizations are implementing?
I think Jason has mentioned quite a number of the steps or measures that we've already implemented. So collaboration spaces and things like that. I think again, it depends very much on the individual's specific circumstances. It depends very much on the teams and what they need and how they operate within each other. Again, it's the openness to try different things, especially since we haven't reached the new normal. I think everyone just, at least in a lot of the private sector firms, people are accepting that we have not reached a new normal as yet. We are on a journey. We haven't come to, we don't know exactly where the journey will end. But because of that, everyone's been quite open to different ideas. So even how you design your workspace, for instance, gone are the days where, if you were starting from, with a clean sheet, you would not now, have multiple single office closed door, offices, for people to work in. You would have more open collaboration spaces, where people can get together and brainstorm ideas. You talked about the greenery and, how, having plants or a window view, the opportunity to breathe fresh air. All of these design elements are coming in to how employers, I think, are looking at their workspaces. So you're trying to bring the outside in. So whether it comes in the form of a green wall or, more plants around the office, or even putting the staff who sit open plan at the window line, as opposed to, having the bosses or, the higher ups, right, sitting along the windows and having that window view. So just changing things like that. Again, just trying different things. We know that we won't get it right in the first go. I mean, it would be ideal that we get it right in the first go, but I think it's the mindset, again, the openness to accept that, okay, let's try this, and if it doesn't work, then we pivot and we try something else, as we all work together to find what is going to ultimately be the new normal for everyone. And in a space that people want to come back to, they want to come together in.
Yep, indeed. Given the norm has not been quite settled, right? It's about being agile and then adapt and change accordingly, and to be innovative about this. So indeed, COVID-19 has changed the way that we work, and then public service is like transforming the workplace, right? To empower and support officers better in new norms across different areas. And especially like what Jason mentioned, public service have, the three key areas around my productivity, my well-being, and my space. So maybe with that, there's a lot of questions coming in. I'm looking at a lot of questions, so I better get to the questions. So with this, maybe the first one to Professor David, right? This question around hybrid work is now becoming common, and where we will not get to see colleagues often, how can we build trust in such a future workplace? I think you mentioned about the implementation and organization, whether they're ready or not. Can you share your view on that?
Yeah, well, if I may try to adapt the question a little bit, it's not just how you build trust, but how you build cohesion, how you build collaboration, and so on, because they are all important. So what is trust, right? As most of you would have heard by me umpteen times now, right? Trust has three dimensions: trust in competence, trust in integrity, and also trust in benevolence. Whether you have good intentions, do you say what you mean? Do you mean what we say? So when we say build trust, just be a little bit careful. Which trust dimensions are we talking about? So then with the dimensions, then you can drill down to say, well, does working away from home affect the trust in competence? Well, then you make sure that you can hold your meetings properly if you're holding it on Zoom. And you make sure that as you implement it, it doesn't affect the task. And make sure that as a supervisor, you know exactly what's the logic of doing this and so on. So the confidence that we need to have in our co-workers and our leaders and our supervisors, competence will come to the fore. ISE, right? Integrity, service, excellence. That's your values in your civil service. Integrity, of course, will be critical, right? The issue that none of these things must be affecting our integrity of the officers in getting jobs done. Whether on the extreme end it be dishonesty or cheating, but it could be less of that. It could be just like sort of a simple lies, if you say, if there's such a thing called simple, and having good intentions, right? Trust in benevolence is very important. When you say something, do your subordinate or your follower actually believe what you just said? That's the intention. So if I'm a director and I tell my officer, say, I need you to come back together on Thursday, so work from home twice a week, but Thursday everybody come back because it is important for us to get to know each other and so on. Do your officers actually believe that's the reason why we are coming back on Thursday? If they believe, then that's good. And if that's the true reason, of course, that's great. But if they thought that, you just want to check on them, it's about surveillance, and so on, and yet you were talking about cohesion and so on, then you lose that trust in benevolence. So having the trust dimensions, understanding how that it can be eroded because it is very fragile. But once people trust you, it is very powerful. Then you can get things done. You can become semi-autonomous. And when people have autonomy and control, the research is very clear. Then people will do their work very well, and the well-being of everybody, including the organization's productivity and welfare, will increase. Right. So I would just say, understand what is trust, or for that matter, what is cohesion, and then build accordingly. Ensure that you are not eroding them, and then how to then deal with them. So the behavioral sciences obviously is important now, but you need to understand the science. Don't reinvent the wheel and start doing research, because there are decades of research to tell us how to do things properly, how to not have negative things, how to role model yourself as a good supervisor and all. So you need to actually go down to, frankly, quite nitty-gritties a little bit, understand the dimensions of the thing that you're concerned about, be it collaboration, trust, cohesion, and so on.
So it's about that software part of it. It's not about just the hard policy.
Understanding the phenomenon that you care about. In this case, is trust. So what is trust? Well, there are three dimensions. If it's cohesion, well, what is cohesion? New officers are very different from senior officers. Senior meaning officers will be around for a long time. If three of us have been working for years, when we switch to a collaboration over the team, it's not a problem. There isn't really a trust issue. In fact, I know you so well already. But if we are new officers, then it's a very different. I don't know your character. I don't even know how you look like. Then you start, everything is not seeing each other. Then it's a different kind of cohesion game altogether.
Yeah, indeed. The challenge about, especially for new hires, that we have really observed through this COVID-19 situation, about new hires, having them plug in and be productive very quickly. And maybe Jason, what's your view on building trust or team cohesion in our workplace?
I don't think I can beat that answer from informed by decades of research. I think it would be very hard to beat. But I would say open and transparent communication between supervisor and officer. That I think is really, really important. Communication about what exactly do you expect to be delivered at the end of the day. I think, because like it or not, when you have more of these flexible arrangements, the level of supervision will go down. I'm not gonna, you miss the opportunity to, bump into the officer along the corridor and say, oh, how's that coming along? And the officer also paise to, text you, say, hey, boss, I got a problem, because they can't catch you in the off moment, and they gotta deliberately come to ask for guidance. So I think the level of supervision that I've noticed, you have to accept that it will go down. So in that kind of situation, what is more important is then having very good, clear, transparent communication with with your supervisors on what exactly is the expectation, when, what is the outcome that you expect, timelines, expectations that when things run into trouble, the officers will raise it. I think when you have that, then you can build trust. I think communication is very important.
Thank you for that. Maybe I'll move on to the next question, right? And this very favorite question about number of days in office come back again, and these have the highest vote. So I just want to kind of bring it up. So from what we see here, right? The poll results earlier on, about more than half feel that it's optimal to work only like 2 days or less from office, and whether the public service is prepared to allow more flexibility. I think we already debated that quite a fair bit. It's probably differ from one job to next job. Maybe Emily, just kind of coming from a private sector perspective before we go back to Jason, you have any view on that from where you come from?
I suppose I need to be careful here because what is applicable in the private sector, I mean, we've got the luxury, right, of deciding our own fate in that sense, whereas I think the public sector is more constrained because you are such a large organization and such a wide-ranging collection of different roles and different responsibilities. I think I guess my fudge answer is really, it depends on the role and it depends on the level of trust that exists between the supervisors and their staff as well. It depends on the nature of the service that you are delivering, because again, if you are in a frontline role, it's not going to be practical. You can't perform your role if you are not going to be in the office, or if you are trying to do this remotely. So I think it does very much depend on the individual circumstances, depends on the role, it depends on it depends on the specific organization. I think the private sector is as I said, has the luxury of defining things in a more specific manner, because one decision that we make will not affect the fate of such a large body of people, which unfortunately or fortunately is the position in the private sector.
Thank you for a perspective. And Jason, tough one.
If you look at the public service PSD guidelines on work from home, it is not public officers can work up to 2 days a week. It was very carefully couched. Public officers can work an average of 2 days a week. So logically, the answer would follow to this question that yes, you can work up to 3 days a week if your job situation, your division allows. The answer is yes. But I think going back to what David and Emily have been saying, it's not, there is really no magic number. You all think, I'm deputy secretary, workplaces. Wow, workplaces are very powerful. Actually, I'm not powerful at all. I can't even decide in MAM everybody to work, I don't know, 1, 2 days, 3 days, because in MAM I have operations divisions, I have people, enforcement officers, investigation officers, I have customer service, I have IT, I have policy officers. Even I can't mandate a single number because it has to be left to the divisional directors. Divisional directors sometimes have to delegate down to individual units, because again, within division, they're very diverse functions. So I think there is enough flexibility today. It is an average of 2 days. You can go above it, you can go below it. We don't have to be too fixated on, and this number will evolve. Today is 2, maybe 5 years later, with more technology, with job transformation, you can easily go up to 3 days without much fuss. So to me, let's not be too bothered by what is this magic number.
Thanks for that, Jason. And it's still really back to the public officers, the divisional director, the line manager. The flexibility in a way is given to the respective agencies or the line manager, and they will decide what works best for that arrangement. Okay, so the next question maybe to Professor David is this question about how we can encourage older workers to embrace hybrid working and change their supervisory regulation. I think Professor David, you talked about very much about some of the behaviors and the implementation, right? The readiness of the organizations. Maybe you can help with this question.
Well, first, older workers, not sure how you define that. Older workers does not mean that you are supervisors. Huh? So that's an important point. You can have supervisors who are much younger than older workers. So I would equate the two together, right? In terms of older workers embrace and your supervisory regulation. So there's an implication that the regulations is done regulated by the supervisor who is old and is not up to date. So I think that thing we need to get away from, especially now where we have retirement age changing, where we have mid-career officers, where we have a more dynamic about role design and all. So please, younger, older workers, this distinction is always quite dangerous. When you try to say, civil service, younger, older workers, of course there are changes in era, changes and values. I've done years of surveys with you guys, knowing that there are age differences, generational differences as well, in terms of values and all. But don't use the older worker, as if the older worker is a homogeneous whole, and they're either very good or very bad and so on. It's quite heterogeneous. The difference between young old often is much more smaller than differences between units, between good and bad supervisors. So I would get away from this age mindset and say how to do it well, regardless of your age. Of course, if you're a young supervisor dealing with an old supervisor, old people who are working with you, older people, and you are unmarried, please be a little bit more empathetic, right? Have a perspective taking and understand that, you are a young officer doing very well, spending all your time at office or at work and all. You can answer at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. But your worker is a married person with 2 kids, and then that's quite different. So lacking of that perspective will be important. So that's where your age and your experiences come in and so on. And then if you're the older supervisor, don't go and berate your younger officer and say, why you guys are not committed, you're not coming to work, why you guys, after a while, you want a different job, do you know that me, your boss, for 10 years, I've been doing this same job and I'm still committed. Those are outdated kind of lectures, to give your younger followers. So those are the things that matter, I think, understanding again the psychology of it, how to communicate, how to work collaboratively, how to message, how to engage. Those are skills that everybody needs to have, not just supervisors. But as supervisors, the onus is on you to have even better skills, of course.
Yeah, thanks for that. And indeed, I think the question here about older workers or the notation around the age is probably one dimension of it. The broader question is probably about how do we identify employees who need support, right? And who need help. Maybe from that perspective, how do we go about identifying this group of employees and what we can do about it? Maybe Jason, you have any perspective to build on this question about how we identify them?
I think I think there is still some of the older mindset that people like FaceTime, they find it easier to discuss things, which is true. When a person is seated right next to you, it is easier. But there is also a cost to it because you lose on the upside of productivity that David talked about. So I think a lot of it is about the mindset. I think and PSD recognizes it, public service recognizes it. So, going forward, we will be encouraging supervisors to move away from assessing performance based on FaceTime, based on hours, to outcome-based, performance-based. What would it take? It would take training. It would take some good practices, some guidelines, some playbooks. I think it would take time because we are still quite used to the old way of performance appraisal. But I think we recognize that this is an area that we need to strengthen, and PSD is working on it. They'll be rolling out more training and more developmental interventions for this.
Okay, thank you for that. And Emily, you have any perspective on this?
If your question, the question that you reframed just now, how do we identify workers who may need more support? And you didn't exactly say what sort of support. If you're talking about, technical support, technical training, and being having the boss accessible to you to ask questions, that's one aspect of support. But I suppose that there is the other aspect also of mental health support, mental health and well-being support, which is the risk that I think we all face now, that we may not always be in the office at the same time as members of our team. We may not always catch the vulnerable members of our team at the right time when they may need our support, simply because you may be working from home that day, I may be, in the office, and then we never see each other. So I think that level of support is also quite important. And fortunately, the reality is that the responsibility for that does fall on the line managers themselves. But many line managers are not currently trained or equipped with the ability to support these individuals, these vulnerable individuals. So I think actually what organizations need to also pay attention to is, besides the technical training that they provide to their people, it's also about making sure that people who are tasked with people management responsibilities are also given the right level of training and development to identify potentially vulnerable individuals within their team, and what steps they can do, what steps they can take to support them. Not to come in as psychiatrists or counselors, because that's not their day job, but to identify where someone may be at risk, and then provide the right options or alternatives, the available support to the individual, so that he or she can actually seek the right level of support from the right professionals. I think that also is something that it's a challenge that we didn't used to face when we were all in the office working day in and day out, and you can see each other every day, and you can read from the body language, you can catch someone who's walking past you that something's just off about that person. It's really hard to do that on Zoom now. If they even turn on their camera, right? So I think that level of support is also an important aspect that we can't forget, and it can't drop off the menu of training that we need to provide our supervisors.
Especially over Zoom or Teams or video conference, you can't catch that. And Professor David?
I just want to add to Emily's point, which of course I agree. You need to identify the someone who requires support. But there's another S. You need to identify the situations where you need support. So during COVID, right, you ask MOM, they will know, and other agencies, MSC and so on. During COVID, it was quite tough for our officers and our temp workers were on the receiving end of calls where people were complaining, about all the various rules and regulations and all. And it can be quite stressful. You're just trying to do your job. You get scolded by everybody who calls in. And many of these are not necessarily very experienced workers who have gone through, like police officers, you know how to handle people scolding you. But for many of our officers, you don't know how to handle that. Then you get very demoralized. And those are the situations, not person, but situations where most people need social support. So we have to understand that, just like the number of days, it's not that 3 days means forever 3 days. If Jason said average is 2, it means that some weeks it can be 3 days, some weeks it can be 1 day. Similarly, some situations will require social support much more than others. So besides looking at who is mentally vulnerable, but is this situation susceptible to things where you really need social support? The research is very clear again, right? That telecommuting, telework, all these are much more positive and helpful for independent, complex tasks where social support is not very important. But when social support is very important to get the task done for your well-being, working from home, telework and remote work actually can have negative consequences. So you need to be a little bit careful. 3 days at home can be worse than 2 days at home if you really need social support.
Okay, yeah. So that's really around that social support and so on and so forth, right? Yeah. So there's this question that maybe that's more for Jason, right? I think we spoke about different roles, probably have different flexible work arrangement, and this specific question about some of the roles that we are looking at across public service, right? From a teaching and a nursing that require more face time. And with regards to all these roles that typically you need a lot more of that, how do we go about supporting these officers? Jason?
Yeah, I think it is indeed constraining if you think about flexible work arrangements only in terms of work from home. But really, as I said earlier, flexible work arrangements cover staggered work hours, right? You come in later, you go off later. The shift system is, to some effect, that a form of staggered work hours. Part-time work arrangements, compressed work week. So I would encourage people in these jobs to explore other types of FWAs. Don't just be too fixated with work from home. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. All right. So we have these questions that pops up maybe for Emily, right? From a private sector point of view. Earlier we talked about, traditionally, kind of shut down the laptop, you leave the office at whatever time, and now things are kind of evolving, right? Obviously, we talk about more driving outcome and not about the amount of work or face time that you have, and how this is like evolving, right? Our performance evaluations to kind of fit into the work environment. Maybe Emily, from a perspective, can you share?
I mean, that's a really good question, right? Because we're no longer in a situation where someone is saying, or where people are saying, can we work remotely? Can we work on a hybrid basis? But how do we work on a hybrid basis? And I think that the follow-on question is, what are the trade-offs to the individual and also to the organization? And evaluating performance is actually a really challenging aspect of this new paradigm that we're in, because unless you've got very clear quantitative measures of performance, so you're talking about billable hours, for instance, unless other than that, where you can your employers can clearly see how many hours have you clocked in a day, and they can see what the work product is to establish whether or not you are still performing at a high level, regardless of whether that's in the office, that's in a Starbucks, or you're working at home. Not every role, again, has that clear quantitative metric that we can use. I mean, again, it does. The performance evaluation process does need to take into account the fact that you're not sitting next to each other every day. You're not being you won't be able to see every member of your team on a regular basis. You won't be able to establish how often and or at what point in time they're actually doing their work. So it does need to be the performance evaluation measures need to move to be more output driven product. You look at the work product and you determine the performance of the individual based on the work product. It's not the easiest thing to do, I will be honest, because again, depending on the role that you have, you can't measure the work product. Not every role has a work product that you can easily measure and sort of check off a checklist. But I think it's also about you need to focus on things like resilience, mental agility, other traits that you would try to look for in an individual to build a whole picture of whether someone is thriving in your organization and whether this is someone with a very clear and long career trajectory. So the performance evaluation does need to does need to evolve, does need to change, and take all these other aspects into account.
Professor Lee.
You know, I sit on boards of many of your several of your stat boards right over the years. I always give grief to the people presenting their work plans every year. Because you see that most of our work plans are very used to having activities, events, counts. And so your KPI is construed in terms of numbers, right? Not that quantitative is bad, but it's just how many activity I did, in the past, how many media release I have done, in the past quarter and so on. And so I told them that the real meaning of KPI is KOI, key outcome indicators, and KII, right? Key impact indicators. So similar to what you say, trying to find ways to operationalize the outcome and the impact. Just like, I can easily, if I were a director, right, it's very easy, right? I know that I can actually do 7 activities in the quarter. I just tell you that I'm doing 5, I should meet, right? Because I can do 7. So people can game the system, right? So if you say it's on FaceTime, well, I can always appear knowing when my director is around. If Jason is around, I walk around his office to make sure that he sees me. And you will get that kind of consequences if you think physical FaceTime become your activity, or in this case, time-based KPI. But I think Jason has already answered that question. It requires training, it requires understanding. Emily put it to the point too, right? For public service, unlike the private sector where the bottom line is quite clear, public service is very interdependent, a little bit more abstract. What is your outcome and impact? So you're doing engagement exercise, what is your role when it succeeds? Is it due to you or somebody else? Actually, you did badly, but the politician saved the job, that kind of thing. So so it's not as clear as the private sector. Having said that, generally it will evolve. People know who are the better officers, and people also know who are the better supervisors. And the better supervisors are one who focus on outcome and impact that is clearly quantified, not quantified, but clearly explicated in the beginning. And you have, it's like a best measures, right? You have interim goals, you don't know, performance evaluation cannot be a end of the year thing, it is a moving forward thing. Nobody should ever be surprised that at December, you thought you were doing very well, and your supervisor say, maybe you should look for a different job now. Nobody should ever go through that. You should know that well before, if that is the case, and try to find ways to solve it.
And Jason?
Maybe I'll add to that. I think there is research that shows that FaceTime is an unconscious bias, and sometimes it seeps into a performance appraisal. I just wanted to share my own experience as a supervisor in civil service, and thinking about some of the ranking and appraisals that I've gone through in the past 2 years. I don't think any of us still go to the old mindset. Have I seen this guy much in person in office over the past 1 year? I think we have moved away from that. I think we will slowly go into. I think we have, and we will do even more of it, where we judge the officer's performance based on output, based on the quality, based on the quantity of output. I don't have to see the person, but I can see how. We talk about policy officers, because it's a job that's kind of easier to work from home. You talk about policy making. Does the officer, how active is the officer in shaping the work over emails, in steering the work? How deep is the analysis? How rigorous is the assessment? When we Skype and we have online discussions, does the officer step up to own it, defend it, explain it? That's what we use to judge officers. Really, and not for me, I don't think many of us would think, I think I didn't see this guy much, must be slacking off. I think I'll just, downgrade him, just downgrade him as a matter of course. I think we have moved away from that, and I think increasingly we will do more of it as it becomes more of a norm. We train more of the supervisors to be more mindful of this.
And I guess with the COVID-19 situation, it probably accelerate that mindset shift and a cultural shift, right, away from that to be a lot more outcome and impact driven. Yeah. So with that, I'm conscious of time, and would like to ask the panelists here, right? Maybe starting with Emily, what is one advice you would like to share with the public officers to strive in a future workplace?
I think there's a lot of talk about you have to do this, you have to be agile, you have to be open, all of which is correct, right? You have to be flexible. There are a lot of demands on us, and it's going to. I don't think that the demands are going to fall away. I think the demands are going to increase, and the pressures, that individuals face on a daily basis are going to increase. So I actually think that, my one piece of advice is be kind to yourselves. Take that 5 minutes to breathe, take that walk out of the office, breathe some fresh air. Even if it's going to the pantry to make your cup of coffee, the routine of pressing the buttons or stirring that cup, it's something that takes you away from your desk. It's not a wrong thing. It's not a bad thing to take time for yourselves, because that little mental break that you take means that you are then fortified to be able to face the next 4 hours of banging out whatever you need to get out. And I think it's moving away. Let's move away from the guilt. Oh, I'm not sitting at my desk. I'm not working 24/7. I'm not logging off only at 9 p.m. right? And working straight. It is the pressures that we face now are incomparable to the pressures that we used to face, say 10, 15 years ago. I think the pace of life is so much faster now. It is really a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a short burst. It's a slog, right? So just be kind to yourselves and take some. Self-care is not a dirty word or two dirty words, right? It's not a bad thing. Just take time for yourself. Your mental health and well-being, will thank you for it, and you will be a more productive or more effective employee to your organization ultimately.
Thank you, Emily. Jason?
I think of the word ownership. I think as officers are more empowered to decide how they work, how much they work, where they work, then all the more it is important that they must own the work. So yeah, that to me is will be very important. Otherwise, yeah, trust breaks down. Not just trust with your supervisors, trust with your colleagues, right? Because you promise to deliver something to your colleague and it never came. So to me, ownership would be very important if we want to continue thriving in the future workplace.
So you own it and you be the person who drive, be it your career or your work, the outcome, you are the person who owns
That's
that.
right. Yep.
Okay. Professor David?
When I write Straits Times articles or when I teach, I like to use acronyms. It's easier for us to remember, using mnemonics. I would suggest that we all practice the 3 R's, whatever your position is. The first R is to refrain, refrain from getting angry when you don't get your 2 days. Refrain from just, 2 days PSD. So sorry, you got to just be 2 days, forget about your 3 days. So refrain, because we are very impulsive to start doing a lot of things. So have your emotions a little bit under control. That's the first R. The second R is to reflect. When your supervisor say do something, or when your subordinate come out with a problem, why did the person do that? Most people are very intelligent, and most people are very, they join the public service because they believe in it. Right? So don't make an attribution that's always negative, right? Reflect about what's going on. Could there be something going on, and so on? And then take action to resolve it. That's the third R, right? So if you want to work from home, HOME, right? Home, which I would say be a little bit more humble. We have a lot of things to learn, every one of us, right? And then you'll always be a bit more open, right? It's not just 2 days must be 2 days, what is it about? Maybe my performance evaluation got to change, right? HOME, right? M is be a bit more magnanimous. There will be times your supervisor got it wrong. There will be your times where your subordinate didn't do what you expect. We are all trying to work on this together, right? So learn to forgive when it is not an integrity issue. We are all learning together. And the final E is to engage, which I thought the theme of this has to be what it is, right? At the end of the day, you need to engage. You need to get it done, get it work, understand the problem, take some perspective taking, and so on. So work from home is really about you are being humble, right? And being open, being magnanimous, and then you got to engage.
So thank you for the panelists advise or the public officers, I hear about the 3R and a HOME acronym, be kind to yourself and own your own work. I think really going forward, things is going to continue to evolve. We just have to act according to the situations as it's pop up. And lastly, I think one of the key advice I'm hearing is also from earlier dialogue is about the organizations and stuff that what we can put that in place is really about how you implement it, the process and so on and so forth. It will not be just the public officers themselves, but also how the supervisor and the line manager or even the division directors are helping to make sure that the implementation and the embedding of the mindset will get in. So with that, we have come to the end of this segment. Thank you very much for your questions. We know that we are not able to cover all the questions, but hopefully it hit the high points for you. Thank you very much. And over to you, Yang.
Thank you to all our speakers and moderator. Now, it's time for us to announce the winners of our team challenges. This is your final chance to vote for the Terrarium Making Challenge via the Pigeonhole link. Voting will close in 1 minute's time. We received a good response of almost 40 submissions from